if we look at creativity only from the perspective of product creation, and that's only what I want, obviously AI is going to be the better option. Right? Obviously AI is going to, because AI is going to do it better than me in terms of writing necessarily, let's say, right? Or for Lewis in terms of whatever art work that he's doing, right? AI is going to be better. But if I want the human, all too human element, and I want a piece from Lewis because it comes from Lewis, right? And because Lewis's soul is in that. Yeah, in terms of product, it may be worse or better, right? Whatever, but it's Lewis's. Boom,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so that's where the question of creativity has to be, I think, ascertained, posited, and then moved forward with.
Welcome to the Explorations Podcast, a show that is about interdisciplinary discussions to unravel the secrets to a life well lived. I'm your host, Lewis, and I'm joined by my wonderful co-hosts, Edwin and Joe. Guys, how you doing today? How you feeling?
Thankfully, doing well, feeling well.
Yeah, likewise.
Today's episode title is Human in the Loop, and we're going to take a look at the current state of AI, the implications in our own lives, because the three of us all are involved in different forms of digital tech and using digital technology in our separate industries. So we're going to take a look at the implications within ourselves and society at large. There's actually quite a lot going on in the world of AI. I'm sure even people not interested in AI, like, will still see the headlines that it every single day. It seems like there's a new feature, a new tool, a new benchmark being surpassed. So why human in a loop? What is that? It's actually a software engineering term that I recently came across. And human in the loop, its technical term means the following. Human in the loop refers to a process where human judgment, oversight, and decision making are deliberately integrated into AI systems. Rather than allowing algorithms to operate autonomously, human in the loop ensures humans remain critical participants in reviewing, validating, and guiding AI processes and outputs. I thought this was a great title for this episode because in my own work, just with content creation as a video editor, video producer, I even like just in current projects, I'm always constantly performing that function, a human in the loop. And I thought this was like a software engineering thing, like it's only reserved for programmers. But personally, I feel like this is something that we're all going to have to kind of wrestle with in our day-to-day lives, no matter what industry we're in. So to just kind of set up to start us off in this conversation, I wanted to ask Joe, because I'm just going to put this on you, Joe. I feel like you are the loudest I don't want to say cynic, but when it comes to AI and LLMs and stuff, you tend to have the most pushback in our personal interactions and conversations. And when you hear this term "human in the loop," when you look at just your current workload and the things that you do today in response to AI and LLMs, what do you think of that term? Do you feel like you are human in this loop within this AI kind of cycle? And what is your personal experience like as of right now, considering where AI is?
It's a great question. You usually always ask great questions, Lewis. And insofar as, the human being as such is caught up in the matrix of technological realities, whether it's the pen and paper parchment, whether it's some kind of spear or some toys or car, etc. We are in that regard, I think, always caught up in the loop. Now, with regards to the specificity of the term in which you read the definition, I think that's an important move. And yeah, this is probably my, the loudest critic or cynic within me. Of course, my hope, let me just offer this as a caveat, is not to communicate some kind of Luddite philosophy, but rather to, through the kind of philosophical and theological gaze that I'm attempting to posit, invite us into a capacious space so that we can orient ourselves properly with this new technology. And so, again, insofar as we ought to always be in partnership with AI and with the generative technologies like that, I think that's an important move rather than kind of creating this autonomy, this self guided reality, which is always to some degree going to happen with regards to technology, but that we shouldn't just sort of wind up the clock and just sort of put it out there and let it do its thing indefinitely. But we should always have a kind of reactivity to it, this kind of reciprocity. And I would even go as far as to say a deep reciprocity is required. And in doing that, what's going to happen is that we're going to come to greater awareness of these technologies ourselves in the intersects of the technologies, and having that reciprocity. My hope is that we're also slowing down so that we can think deeply about the implications of all of this. So those are just my initial remarks to such a good question.
I think you do a good job of kind of raising this like tension as a human being of what kind of relationship do I have with AI? Like, I can only imagine that listeners are all over a spectrum of either flat out rejecting the tools, fully embracing the tools, or somewhere in between. And I think there's a tension of the tool being a tool, like the pen and paper, or is it actually a hindrance to myself, to society? Am I just like offloading my brain, my critical thinking skills? And I'm hoping that we can have a deep discussion about that, because personally I feel like even in the loop part, like it's like I get this visual of like being on a roller coaster ride like throughout my week of
Mm,
just dealing with these tools, things kind of moving faster and faster than I am
yeah,
used to, like even just months ago. And these
yeah.
types of discussions I really appreciate, because I feel like I'm taking a step back and kind of looking into what is going on. So, Edwin, I like to bring you in because you tend to have a more positive view of AI and its potential. And I wonder if you still feel the same way as these tools continue to get incredibly powerful in such a short amount of time. Have you kind of given thought to your relationship to AI in a unique way since we last spoke? And what is your take on the term like human in the loop, and just this overall question of humanity's relationship with AI?
Yeah. Let me first start with that. I think one of the reasons I love this discussion is that we bring in our own unique experiences in the into the conversation. Lewis, you with the artistic, Joe with the philosophical, and mine's with a bit more uh, sort of pragmatic capitalism, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
Uh, be a bit reductionist and in the way that we do things. So I do tend to lean a bit sort of techno optimist there, but it's a slight lean in, right? I'm not too far from Joe. I think Joe being very cautionary, and I'm always listening to him in terms of where we're headed. And so for human in the loop, I'm actually pretty optimistic. In fact, I think it's the right way to think about our relationship with AI. You know, we've spoken about technology before and the relationship of technology with human beings. Our relationship with technology has existed for quite some time now, and it's part of the reason why we have a modern society. I don't think AI is that different from that, and as a result, I think that we continue to push the boundaries of our technological evolution. And this whole concept of like a technosphere or like ecosystem and so on, as a separate entity in of itself, evolving side by side with biological beings, is it shouldn't be foreign to any sort of Star Trek lover
Mm.
and so on, because it does point to a inevitable reality of our relationship, right? We've been gone through like a terraformation of Earth already in the
Mm.
way that we've created all type of infrastructures that has changed the way our world currently exists, and we will continue to do that. So AI is a catalyst of all of these things. It's just like I see this as the great acceleration, and in some ways we become our own individual like corporation, right? We begin to scale our impact. So human in a loop is crucial in that we are CEOs of our lives, and AI will allow us to do that in a way that has never been done before. So you take the human out, right? What are you left with, right? What are you scaling? So I think, and I continue to think that the human in the loop model is a great way to think about the way we will proceed in our evolution with AI.
I would like to push back on the positives of AI in that I wanted to ask, like, does it feel like because humanity, global capitalism, like we were in this kind of system prior to AI and LLM's development, is AI just merely accelerating capitalism to the point that it's like like the atomization of society is like on a totally different level? How do you guys feel about this idea that AI is merely just creating more of a wealth gap, or it's just really benefiting the the 1% class, the company owners who already had means, and although it is a tool to boost the individual, I don't know, just like the pessimist in me sees things just kind of moving faster towards this direction that we were already headed prior to the introduction of these tools. And I wonder if, like, yeah, like what do you guys make of that, just like from the perspective of the individual and the human being, like having to now deal with an even greater challenge, because it's like, sure, we have AI tools in our back pocket, but we're going up against like larger entities. It seems like we're at odds with these larger entities that also have access to these tools and are able to leverage them in a greater way. And yeah, I was just wondering if you can speak into that, um, because that's something that I wrestle with every day at this point.
Go ahead, Edwin. Jump on in.
Yeah, I love this question. I've spent a lot of time thinking about it myself, because a lot of what I do is think about and through my work try to influence our socioeconomic system in a way that benefit those who are disadvantaged. And one story that sticks with me, and we'll put a reference to this text in the show notes. But there's a book that I read, and it started off with a story about an organization that has discovered general AGI, and it plays it out. And in this scenario, so they day one AGI, day two, they're like, okay, AGI, tell me how to maximize our profit
Hmm.
in a way that the world will not, essentially would not find out that I'm using AGI to maximize profit. Literally walks through the formula of how to make more profit. And the organization say, great. The organization gets a little bit more money. With the more profit, it pours it into a more powerful system. And in this story, the organization becomes so powerful. Oh, and the other component of it was, okay, so it gets the money and it says, okay, I need a more politically stable world. These are the things that you need to do with nation leaders in order
Wow.
to influence them so that so you could achieve peace. So it goes through this cycle of literally how you maximize profit, how do you stabilize policy and political entities, and then at the end of it, essentially you're left with this one organization that controls all. Because essentially, once you do that, it's off to the races. And every day that this AI actually gets more powerful, it creates that much more of an advantage against other organizations, other entities, on and on and on. And so at some point, you're left with an organization that controls all. So that's the kind of like nightmare scenario that I'm left with AI, not Terminator, but this entity that actually controls so much of what our world does. And by the way, that shouldn't sound that unrealistic when you talk about what's happening in our political environment today, right? I mean, it's just if any one of those organizations, right? You could talk about the Max Sevens, you can talk about individuals. If any of them are using AI as a way to figure out what they do on a day-to-day basis with political actors in their organization, They're not going to tell us. And if they're not doing it, they're actually not great businesses, right? So very, very likely they're doing this, right? It's very likely that I won't name any organization. Organization X is actually leveraging AI as a way to set strategy. That's I mean, I would do it, right? So so this is already happening, and so from that perspective, there is a growing inequality. On the other side of that, I was just in Microsoft, and there was a great presentation about how an organization could actually start to adopt AI, and I think it's also true of individuals. So I'll just quickly walk through it. It starts with data collection. Everything that you know about yourself, right? Whether you're an organization or person, any data that is associated with yourself, you got to get better at actually curating it, right? So that's step one. And then step two is AI adoption, which is like, the three of us, we're knee deep in there in terms of, okay, now that you have data collection and you adopted AI, like you're using ChatGPT or an LLM, you're putting that on top of your own data. So, we're not there yet as individuals. The idea is that when Joe uses ChatGPT and he asks a question, it already knows everything about Joe. Every paper he's written, every email he's sent, everything. So it has that additional context and it's able to actually amplify in his voice whatever the thing he's doing. And then step three is simulation, essentially a digital twin. So again, organization and individuals can do this. And when you create a simulation, what you then are able to do is to predict the future in some way or better understand the current situation, which is this is the golden egg of all organizations and individual, right? Right. So when you have a digital twin, you can actually start to model the thing that impacts you in a way that de-risk the decisions that you make, right? So everything is about the decision we make. And then the last step was quantum. And in quantum, referring to quantum computing, we're not going to get into this, and it's probably another fun episode. I know Joe and I will have a lot of fun with the physics of this. But in quantum computing, what happens is that what we're talking about, like we're talking about AI being a catalyst. Quantum computing, in theory, if it's able to do what, and it actually it's in the lab, it has shown that it's able to do what it's promised to do. But when it becomes more commercially available, quantum computing will go beyond what we're talking about in terms of a catalyst and acceleration. And when that happens, what we're talking about, Lewis, in terms of inequality it's almost it's like nothing we'll ever have seen before. And so I think this is a conversation we need to be having. I know this is where I actually have to. I really will lean on Joe's caution here around understanding the philosophy and ethics around the work that we're doing.
Yeah, Joe, I wanted to follow up by asking you a question in regards to like with the advancements that Edwin's talking about and the I guess opportunities to the individual. Like, should we all kind of take a step back and like reevaluate our professional and personal goals? Like, what sort of questions or posture should we have, whether we are choosing to develop these AI tools for ourselves, or if we're, I don't know, just even like just as human beings, like living in the world even outside of computing and the digital realm of life. Like, it seems like these AI advancements and the promise of quantum computing is like encroaching on a lifestyle that we were used to for 20, 30, 40 years. And it's like, how should we philosophically kind of think about and process this rapid change, like on a personal level?
I would first invite folks to be okay with the discomforting feeling that can arise sometimes in slowing down and being reflective and introspective. When engaged in the intellectual habit of philosophical, theological rumination, that activity is not necessarily sexy. I say that to say it's not necessarily attractive. And especially for those of us, all of us really, but of course to varying analogical degrees, where we are caught up in the speed of everyday life. Right. I'm a native New Yorker, the New York Minute. And so then to be invited into a space to really sit and put the pause button on, press that, and to really reflect about it is not something necessarily that comes natural given the sort of cultural milieu we're in. If we do that, then we ought to, I would say, ask ourselves some questions that at first glance may appear to be somewhat rudimentary or superfluous or even obtuse, like a little weird, right? Questions like, what is my meaning in this world? What am I doing with regards to my vocation, my calling, or the particular, let's say, job that I'm engaged in? What is my role? Practically, that might be thinking about that in light of a JD, right? Somebody writes out their JD, and the JD doesn't necessarily have to be with respect to the particular organization that they're linked to, although of course that's going to be inclusive of that, but it may be a JD that also encompasses their other roles, their motherhood, their sonship, what does it mean to, right, et cetera, et cetera. And even in that space of writing out the JD, possibly with pen and paper, maybe typing it out, because even the activity of that can be a mode of meditative reflection. What will be unearthed are some key insights. And that's, for the most part, without taking much time on this, that is for the most part the trajectory I would invite us to kind of walk in. And in doing so, just like when you meet with a consultant, let's say for an organization or whatever, the first hour or so, or the first several minutes or so of the engagement is filled with skepticism in the room. It's like, bro, who's this dude coming in? Who's this lady? What does she know?
Yeah.
Like, there's this natural, like, come on, bro.
Yeah.
And then you're kind of like seduced into a different frame of reference, of which then you're like, okay, now. And then over time, let's say if you're doing a retreat or whatever, the space begins to open up and you're just like, if things are done well, you're excited. You're like, wow, this is great. We need this again. There's something of that dynamic that I would invite people to engage into with regards to this kind of slow philosophical gaze, this meditative perspective, creating again capacious space, wide spaces for us to really reflect on the matter. Now, again, interestingly enough, given the generative tool of something like AI with large language models and things like that, we can do that in concert with prompting. Why not? And that's something that can be explored. Again, my natural disposition is not to move towards a kind of Luddite perspective, but to say, oh, in what sense can this tool be used to, as I've said in previous conversations, to humanize, to bring about greater human flourishing? And even in that, and I'll close with this, even in that requires reading, reflection, conversations across the board. Go back 2,400 so years ago to Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. He begins by saying, look, we all desire to be happy. The human is oriented towards the good. We long for that in many ways. The brutes among us think that this can be achieved by means of a kind of material acquisition, or the acquisition of status and honor or power or pleasure. This is not really the best given our design, given what we are as rational animals, et cetera, et cetera. And so what Aristotle, using him just as an example, we can do the same with Confucius. We can do the same in a different metaphysical register with the Bhagavad Gita, with Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching, the biblical narrative, the Quranic movements, all of that. What we have there then is this invitation, right, to a deeper perspective. Let me just end right there with that, because there's more to say, but let me just end right there.
Joe, I would like to use your profession as an example, because you shared a very interesting article that featured Bill Gates claiming that there's going to be powerful AI tutors and personalized learning tools within the next 18 months, and that it sounds exciting, the prospect of having these sort of support mechanisms. I wonder if you, at the same time, like if you felt any sort of anxiety or discomfort at this idea that like your industry, the educational field and the work that you do in academia, if you felt anything reading that, like, okay, my field is changing in this amount, or it's already changing, or I'm not sure what you're feeling, but just like
Mm-hmm.
how did you take that, like just within your own career and in your professional world, that this idea of
Great question.
AI just kind of coming in and just like changing
Usurping,
everything.
usurping the role.
Usurping is a great word. Yeah, like yeah. So what's your take just in your professional career on that?
Yeah, and it's a great question. Listen, look, interestingly, I didn't feel anxious in thinking about it. Neither do I feel anxious or a bit uncertain right now as I ponder the possibility of having these language, right, generative tools to come in, and they can become better instructors, better educators, better professors than me. To use the imagination, I think the robotics would need to get to a certain level. If the LLMs can have the interface or be embedded in the robotics, and the robotics are synthetic, such that you have this humanoid coming in and lecturing, and it's superhuman like, and yet the quote unquote benefit is that the repository of knowledge is endless, right? Rather than human fallibility. I can see that happening. Can I see it happening in terms of people just interacting with screens, and beginning right now to offset educational responsibilities to the screen, right? And you're engaging in AI. Yeah, I could see that as well. I think, again, the robotics piece would need to come up for people to become more and more accustomed to such a space, because not everybody is necessarily oriented to the screen in terms of learning. And I think some data is showing that that doesn't necessarily allow for a certain, or maybe a perhaps robust educational model if we're just located or limited to the screen. Okay, all that being said, the reason why I think, and I would need to sit with it, that I am not quite concerned or nervous when I think about it is because I see the possibility of a shift, right? Well, in one sense, what that would require me to do is to, if I wanted to stay within the educational realm, maybe have oversight, maybe think about prompting, right? So then you're going to want to hire the best educators who are keen at prompting and
Mm-hmm.
kind of providing that human oversight of what's happening in the educational world, right? So there's a systemic layered perspective. I would see myself possibly moving up to that. The drawback, of course, is that that's more of an administrative task, if I can use that. And I would, yes, lose the great love that I have, which is standing in front of people and teaching and engaging in human interactions. All of that being said, I think people would still want that human interaction. Even if, let's say, you can't tell the difference between a synthetic android and a human, I think given how we are oriented, humans always want to be aware of, okay, is this real or not, right? There's a natural orientation to the truth, right? People have a natural aversion towards deception. We only opt for deception if we see the truth as a particular threat. All things considered, though, if the truth is not a threat, we're gonna want to know the truth, right? No one likes to be lied to. No one likes to be deceived. And so I think I it's hard for me to imagine then people entering into the educational world and not then having the option to toggle between, oh, I'm down for taking this course that's given by a synthetic android, or I want a human, right? Or maybe a co-teaching. You know what I mean? So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Can I add to that?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Part of just listening to you, Joe. Part of the challenge of what AI, in a good way, will pose to us is that the way we teach in the first place is quite inefficient. In that, what I would add is that in some ways we have to become more creative about what the educational process looks like in the first place. So I know you and I have had a lot of discussions about leveraging something like counseling and coaching as an educational
Yeah.
tool.
Right.
Most of I look at something like Notebook, which Google has, which is taking information, throwing it in, and then it turns it into a podcast for you to listen to. And so, like, and in a lot of ways, podcast is the way that I'm consuming a lot of my education these days.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so to your point about like the individual touch or the one-on-one piece to this, what in my mind, what that might look like is you have the more formal education being driven by AI, where, okay, or instruction is probably, I'm trying to deconstruct this in a way, right? We're making this up in real time.
Mm.
That's happening with AI. But then you have to have now you have more time as a human being for the one-on-one individual or tailored approach to counseling the person or coaching the person through the challenges that they're facing. Because education is not simply information consumption. There's a lot of self that is involved in that journey, right? When you take a biology course, it's not simply that you're learning about the cells, but you're trying to understand yourself in the process. I am made up of these things. What is the implication of that? Any great biologist, anthropologist, whatever, what makes them great at their field is that connection to self. And that realization or that opening of how the reality that they're learning about impacts who they are.
Mm-hmm.
So the educational journey, I think, will transform as human beings will play more of a role in the process of making that a richer experience.
A question I have from this is how, if, I choose to incorporate these tools as part of what I do, as part of attaining reaching certain benchmark success goals, how can I maintain like an authentic voice while using these tools and in a way where, I don't know, like the intentionality is there, that it doesn't come across to either a client or an audience that there's like deception involved, like how can we maintain an authentic humanness in what we do when along the way in that process we're using tools that kind of are connected to these like huge major corp, like, like there's this using these tools. I feel like there's this sort of trade-off that happens. It's like I'm giving up my this like artisanship, like
Yes,
this
that's
like
right. That's right.
versus like me doing something
That's
completely
right.
as an individual on my own. Like I'm
Yes.
tapping into this bigger thing.
Yeah.
And I'm worried about the authenticity kind of being lost, but I also see that tool as having a lot of potential. So I wonder if you guys have thoughts
Yeah.
on that. Like what should we consider and do?
Look, I think I've mentioned this in past conversations. I can envision a future not too distant where, let's say, in the world of the arts, people will want to know, was this piece, whatever it is, generated in concert with AI? The person who's doing this, number one. Did they use AI in generating this? Number two, is this all AI? Or number three, is this all human with
Mm,
no recourse to AI? Creating some kind of, I don't know how this would even be possible, criteria through which you can adjudicate of the three which one it is, and then putting a price tag to it. It's like, nah, I only want human created art, or I want AI
wow.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, presupposed into that, under that, are certain economic principles that I think need to be I don't know how the kind of capitalist system that we have right now is sustainable given the trajectory of AI.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
just don't know how, right? Because people will lose their positions, their careers, whatever, as everything is continually being outsourced to AI. How are people going to make a means to an end? So there has to be a complete reimagination of economics and sustainability, all of that there. But back to your question, Lewis, I think there has to be this intentionality and this really again, that philosophical introspective disposition, right? So you as an artist, me as a writer, right? When I engage in that, I need to ask myself, okay, if I'm writing an academic piece, do I want to have recourse to AI? And if so, how so? Right? Do I want it to help me craft my sentences? Do I want it to write on my behalf and then I just tailor it? Do I, right? And that kind of intentionality is so important, because if we don't have that, we are most assuredly going to default to this kind of, we're like water, right? We move down the path of least resistance, right?
Mm,
It's a kind of natural laziness.
mm,
And so we're going to be like, just let me boom boom, and that's it, right? And then put it out there as if it's me. And that might be legitimate under certain conditions, and it may not be, and I would articulate that it is not legitimate in other conditions. But those are just some things there.
I have a bit of a hot take on this, in that I don't, this whole thing about creativity.
Be careful.
Yeah, look, we are not as creative as we would imagine ourselves to be. Everything that we do is on the margin of the creation of the human being that came before us, right? Outside of the things that we learn, there is not much, right? All we're doing in that way, I think we mirror AI, right? Someone has done a cartoon. I know the whole giblification thing that we is the thing now. Someone has done a cartoon. I take that. I'm like, oh, you know what? I'm gonna add, square pixels on top of that. Imaginative, right? And it becomes a thing, right? And I know I'm gonna get haters for this, right? But the reality is we're doing the same thing that AI is doing. Like, literally, someone asked a question once of, is there going to be a time where we actually essentially award a Nobel Prize to an AI? Right? So what happens, Joe, for example, if we run a supercomputer, a quantum computer, it does all the modeling and it cracks the code of string theory. Who gets the Nobel Prize? The person
who prompted
and plugged the computer in, or the AI, right? And I think there's deep existential questions that we have to ask ourselves about human being, and what does it mean to be creative, and why is it important? Why is it important to be creative? To what end is creativity important to us, or being an artist, right? And so on. So yeah. Anyways, yeah, that's my hot take.
Let me respond to that, Edwin. It's an interesting take, right? Because in that we can ask the question, and I think you're moving there, which is, again, just like you said, I'm echoing you here. What does it mean to be creative? And as we think about that, I have to think about that in relation to self and selfhood, right? So the AI is mimicking, right, the human capacity, and in many ways can exceed our capacity insofar as it has recourse to all the tools and the repository of knowledge, et cetera, lack of quote unquote fallibility. Okay, but the reason why we wouldn't, let's say, award a Nobel Prize to AI is because it's not a self. Now, let's say we get to general AI and we can create a kind of self-aware, and that's a huge question, right, philosophically. And I mean, now you have a sentient being, right? And that's sci-fi, and that's something that we can table for now, right? We're not there yet, and we can ask really critical questions as to whether or not such a thing is at all even possible. But what we have now is, well, look, creativity is creativity insofar as the self makes the move. If we look at creativity only from the perspective of product creation, and that's only what I want, obviously AI is going to be the better option. Right? Obviously because AI is going to do it better than me in terms of writing, necessarily, let's say, right? Or for Lewis in terms of whatever art work that he's doing, right? AI is going to be better. But if I want the human, all too human element, and I want a piece from Lewis because it comes from Lewis, right? And because Lewis's soul is in that. Yeah, in terms of product, it may be worse or better, right? Whatever, but it's Lewis's. Boom,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so that's where the question of creativity has to be, I think, ascertained, posited, and then moved forward with.
Yeah, I like that.
I have a lot of questions about like the societal implications of this human in the loop relationship, just even like countries and AI development. I think we'll shelve that for a future conversation. But I just wanted to kind of close on this perspective of the individual, this term human in the loop, where we are now with AI tools, and I don't like, after hearing this discussion, I just like, in the comparison between an AI tool and a human being, like a human being can like walk in nature. Like the human being can do things as of today that like AI tools can't. And I wonder if you guys have any sort of closing thoughts on that relationship from all perspectives. Like what should we be kind of thinking about this week as we kind of keep processing the human in the loop term, the limits that AI has on the one hand, and also the limits that we have as human beings. Like, I just wonder if you guys have any closing thoughts on that. Like, how do we take this term human in the loop? How do we make better decisions in light of seeing the improvements, the changes that are happening on a human level and on an AI level?
Yeah. I love this question because it goes hand in hand with what Joe was saying in terms of our definition of what is it to be human. Yeah, this artificial intelligence. I love the word. I know people are getting sick of it, but artificial intelligence. And the one thing that has happened recently is the agents have gotten a lot more powerful. And it's a first step, right? Because you're saying to be in this world, right? So the agents are not able to get feedback, right, from its interaction with the digital world to inform its actions. That's, like Joe said earlier, that's not a step too far from taking this AI and putting it in a humanoid robot, right? And because it's able to do that already. Like we already have that. So the marriage of the two is very close. And when that does happen, what does it mean? Like those big questions of, okay, now, right? We're talking about, okay, to be human is like, we used to say it's the pass the Turing test, right? Oh, AI can't do that. To be human is to be able to generalize intelligence. Oh, AI can't do that. And then so every single time we say that, AI comes back and is able to break that boundary, which means I think I would love to. I know we don't have time. Would love to hear Joe's take on this, which is what it tells me is that we have a flawed definition of what is it to be human. And there's something exciting about AI forcing us to wrestle with that question. So that's where I'll leave things, because I think there is a door that's being creaked open there.
The philosophical, the theological anthropology necessary here is no doubt essential and decisive, right? If we think of the human being merely in terms of properties and qualities that the anthropos possesses, we might find ourselves displaced as technology continues. And I think that's to your point. If we re-envision or come to a greater discovery that the human being is something other, right? And what that means, that might mitigate some of the quote unquote potential risks of being displaced or usurped in our own identity. Maybe not, right? Of course, I have certain theological resources in which I would say, no, that's not possible, but I would need to unpack that. But to your question, Lewis, look, in terms of limits, right? If we allow our imagination to run with the trajectory of AI right now, I think we could say the potential for AI is limitless, right? If we see it in terms of its productivity, in terms of its capacity to put out whatever X value we're looking for. If we are asking the question, and in that sense, right, you juxtapose the AI system with the human is, of course, limited, right? And we don't need AI to even recognize that, right? We are limited in our. If we think of the human being, given the beautiful, infinite, I would say, dignity and worth of the human being as such, the human being is limitless, right? The human being is limitless. Not seeing the human being as a means of production, to borrow and to misappropriate Marx here, but to see the human as such. There is, I would say, this infinite plasticity that is the human being. And I would even go as far as to say the fact that we have AI as a product, as a cultural, artificial product of the human being as such, is a revelation of that, right? It points to that. Okay, let me just end with a theological point, which may be crazy, right? The Tower of Babel.
Mm.
You know what? We'll go to the Tower of Babel in another conversation. Let's just consider, let's consider the logos, right? The logos as the word, the logos as the transcendent meaning of reality, the logos as wisdom infleshed. When we encounter this authentic wisdom, and we see intimations of this in many different traditions, right? If you look at Socrates, Socrates was put to death, right? He's an instantiation, as it were, of the logos, not in its full way, right? When the logos, when we are encountered by this transcendent reality, we will use our technological means to silence it, because we see it as a potential threat, and the threat stands over and against me as a reckoning of the finitude of my own existence, but also the superfluousness of my pursuits of daily life, power, pleasure, etc. It's like, nah, I don't want that, bro. So Pontius Pilate, behold the man, ecce homo, and here is Jesus with the crowning of thorns, right? The crown of thorns, the wounding, covered in a purple robe, you know, the mocking, the jeering. Behold the man. We will use our technology. We will craft wood from a tree. We will pick up hammer and nail. We will use our sophistication to silence the logos. We have a natural disposition because of the fall to do this. Now, of course, I'm speaking unapologetically here as a Catholic, as a Christian. And I understand that not everybody has recourse to those theological wells. That being said, run with me with the imagination. We silence it, and we crucify it. The question is there some dynamic like that happening right now? There's always a dynamic of that happening, I think, in our lives. What does that mean in relation to technology? Am I crucifying the logos when I sit down to write a paper? I just have recourse to the AI, and then I pump the paper out. It's like, there it is, and I put my name on it. Is there a kind of crucifying of the transcendent element which is within me? The Stoics would speak of us as the logos spermaticos, right? The divine spark, the divine seed, logos spermaticos. And the Stoics would speak of us as cosmopolitans, right? That we are citizens of the universe by virtue of that, right? By virtue of our. So are we forfeiting our birthright? Are we forfeiting what makes us human, right? In the use of this technology. And these are the things that I would put out for folks to reflect on.
Well, I definitely want to thank you guys for this very compelling conversation. We will definitely be continuing this discussion and continuing to stay tuned to the ongoing technological advancements that are happening every single day, but also our relationship to it. What does it mean to be human, and society at large? Like how are things changing as a result? So thank you guys. I really look forward to having these conversations, and I'm sure the listener is as well. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Louis.